Right, it's first thing in the morning. Please ignore the hair. It usually tames itself throughout the day. So today we're talking Howling Dark, which is Christopher Rocchio. Now, I think I might just kind of blend um, Empire of the Sun, which is the first book, into this review as well. I read that a while ago, but I guess the points I'm going to make sort of, for the most part, apply to both. Um, and I think this is a actually like quite a good book for a number of reasons, or both of these books are quite good books for a number of reasons. So Christopher Rocchio is a he's quite a young author. I think he wrote Empire of the Sun in his, I want to say, early 20s, maybe mid 20s, but he was fairly young when he wrote it. The book covers the life of a chap called Hadrian, who is born into a noble-ish family, like quite a wealthy family. I think their status has kind of sagged over the generations, but they still wield a certain amount of power and a certain amount of gravitas, and they have, you know, they're certainly not poor as a family. Hadrian is the elder brother in the family. He has a little brother called Crispin, and he, you know, as the elder brother, is due to inherit the title and the the land, etc., of his family. The book is I didn't read it as a physical book. I actually read I guess on Audible. We can have a debate, I guess, about whether or not that constitutes reading it. But anyway, I read it on Audible, and the Audible narrator, I think, is quite good. So he sort of has this like quite elevated, quite, I guess you would describe it as posh if you're in the UK, way of speaking that I think kind of matches with the character of Hadrian and his tone. So Hadrian's story is it's one of those frame narratives. I think everyone who's looked up this book knows this, but very quickly, he it's a frame narrative where he's sat, you know, in the future, or I guess the current day, talking about reflecting on his life, and one of the things he did was kill like an entire race of aliens, and along with that, billions of people as well. But and that he's sort of held up as a hero and a villain for those things, and I think he's awaiting trial or something like that, or he's in prison. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, he's done this pretty massive, grand, awful, yet, you know, possibly necessary thing, and this is kind of recounting his life from sort of adolescence all the way up to the point where you know, he does this act, which presumably is in, I think there's six full stories on it, and presumably that happens in the sixth, but I don't know yet. I haven't got there. So the book, the first book, Empire of the Sun, covers his earlier lives. I'm not really going to touch too much on the plot of that, except to say it sort of, I don't think, goes exactly where you think it's going to go. And most people say that the first book is weaker than the second. I would say that's true, but the second is, it isn't, well, I don't know that I'm going to read the third. I think I probably will, but the second wasn't like enormously compelling. So why do I think it's good? Well, the one thing I would say about this is I've been looking for this. By the way, sorry, this is my Kindle holder. It's not some weird device. Just so we're clear, is it? I use it to hold my Kindle when I'm reading. Anyway, so if you're looking for, so on the books that I read and review are like a pretty eclectic mix, but a lot of them are sort of 60s, 70s, new wave science fiction, and I think I've explained sort of in part why I like that. But for anyone, you know, who hasn't watched those videos, I like that because the writing quality, there was a real push for a standard on writing quality of science fiction in that era. So the the threshold to be able to publish a book meant that you had to have pretty good chops as a writer. And then obviously books that have survived since the 60s and 70s, the ones that people talk about, the ones that are still available and easy to get, are the ones that were, you know, of greater quality anyway. So those books, people who write them, like Silverberg, who I really like Bob Shaw, who I really like, um, uh, Christopher Priest, J.G. Ballard. Those people are just objectively pretty good authors, like very good prose stylists in whatever fashion of prose styling they want to do. The books are well structured, well paced, characterization's good. They're just in terms of quality of the writing, they are good. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have the most compelling plot. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's always the most interesting book to read, although a lot of them are. But the writing quality is there, and they can touch on deeper themes that I find interesting, and is one of, I think, the advantages of science fiction as a genre is it gives you a much easier platform on which to make a more valid point or a wider point about society. You know, it's easier to do allegories when you're talking about space aliens, or when you're talking about some like innovative technology that's completely changed things. It's just easier to do that there. The reason I'm saying that is I think the modern science fiction and modern science fantasy I've read, which I really like, right? This isn't to be disparaging of those, but they don't have that rigor and that quality that the older science fiction books do. Sometimes they have a more compelling plot, like I am, and more compelling world building. I like Brandon Sanderson. I will accept he's not the best author in the world. He's certainly not the best writer in the world. He's not funny, but I do like a lot of his books. Mistborn, Stormlight are very appealing books to me, despite how long they are. So I've been trying to find a modern fantasy writer that blends those two, and actually, in terms of fantasy, I think Steven Erikson is probably there, where I don't think he's quite as good an author as those people I'm saying, but he's certainly up there. Like, the books are, they are subtle and intricate and difficult to read, but have a compelling message and those kind of things. So Malazan, I would definitely put in the category similar to that sort of 60s, 70s science fiction. But I haven't found science fiction author to do that yet. And actually, I think if anyone gets pretty close, it's Rucchio, or however you pronounce his name, the author of these books. He can write, and he's clearly a very smart, capable person. And I kind of trust him as an author to be able to deliver. But even just kind of reading passages, he clearly has an education that spans beyond sort of the books, and there are some quite clunky references to things like Tacitus, who was obviously a Roman writer at the time, at the time of the Romans, and I like other philosophers as well. I happen to have a degree in ancient history, so like when I saw a Tacitus reference, I was quite happy. But the point I'm making is, he seems to be able to marry up that sort of the modern fantasy styling with the chops of a decent literary writer, and you can almost pick out passages of his and highlight them, and they are just very well written paragraphs, which is, to be fair, more difficult to spot on the audio. So I read Empire of the Sun on Kindle, or mostly on Kindle. I think I audioed a little bit of it, but so that's his strength, right? And that is, I think, not a strength to be underestimated. Now the issue I have is, the other thing I really struggle with is long books, and these are long books in long series. So I think like the audio for Howling Dark's about 36 hours. I think that means it's about 900 pages or something, and there's 6 of those books. So they're just quite a lot to get through, and I don't know how much he can kind of. I think when you're following one character, who has one story to tell, or well, who has it follows one character throughout telling his story. It's just very hard to sort of, by the time you get to the end, it's almost it's hard to remember the foundations of the beginning, and it's sort of like you're writing different characters each book because of just how much time has passed and how much information you have to sift through. It's sort of almost that weight of information that you have to keep with you is almost impossible to keep with you, and so you sort of forget all the foundational character points about him. Obviously you remember a couple, but most of them kind of go. And so I just think when you make it that long, it's actually harder to make characterization good, because you sort of miss the point on how to build a character and build them memorably, because there's just too much information there to be able to pass through, unless you reread them a number of times. But if I'm not. While I think rereading is very important, right, and I think I think some books are just meant to be reread. I don't really want to pick a 6-book series that's like 5,000 words in total, 50,000 words in total, and that isn't what I mean. 5,000 pages in total. That I then have to reread and reread to really get like the key message through about it. And I appreciate that's not Rocchio's fault, but to me that makes it less compelling than a Silverberg book, which does incredible characterization in 250, 300 pages. So that's why I think I will eventually listen to them, probably on Audible, but I don't know when exactly. Hopefully that all makes sense. But look, I think as much as like it was too long and I got a bit frustrated at the end because it was too long, the story is compelling enough and the writing is good enough that I think if you're someone who cares about that kind of thing, who's a little bit frustrated with modern fantasy, modern science fiction that doesn't have where the prose is just very simple, workmanlike. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if you're kind of tired of seeing that over and over again, this may be a good palate cleanser for you. Hopefully that makes sense. Cheers.